Now, for something completely machinima.
Tracy Harwood. So I've done a little bit of digging around and I've discovered.
Ricky Grove. Fog comes in on little cat feet.
Phil Rice. This is the best film that I've seen all year and maybe ever.
Damien Valentine. Use the machinima, Luke. Hello, and I'm Damien Valentine. This is And Now for Something Completely Machinima. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Phil Rice, Ricky Grove, and Tracy Harwood.
Hello.
Hey there.
This week, well, first of all, Happy New Year. We're January.
Happy New Year.
But we're actually recording this in December, so we're still in the past. But Happy New Year to all of you listeners in the future. Ricky, this is your film that you've chosen for us. What is it? What have you got for us?
Well, as you know, I've made a commitment to go through the Machinima archive at archive.org and choose some films that I think are interesting. The last one I did was The Internet is for Porn. Well, we're going to really radically mix it up with a film that was highly impactful on the machinima community when it came out, called Still Seeing Breen, by then president of the Machinima Academy, Paul Marino, who, after a few years working with machinima, went on to work with a major game company. And but his film was created inside of Source Filmmaker, including the Face Poser software, which is included as part of that. And before I let Tracy do her background on it, I'd like to mention a few things. I was inspired to make this choice because Valve dropped a 20th anniversary edition of Half-Life 2 on November 16th of this year. And it was a major update because they not only fixed lighting issues and texture issues and some minor bugs, but they included episodes 1 and 2 of Half-Life 2 and the Forgotten Coast episode. They're all part of the package. And another almost 3 hours of commentary, a new documentary. They also integrated Half-Life 2 with the Steam Workshop. And for those of you who know the Steam Workshop, it means that you can take models, weapons, creations by users and integrate them into the game through Steam Workshop, which is really, really great. I also started playing Half-Life 2 again and am just loving it, re-experiencing it, the wonder of being in that incredible creation. But most significantly was I started working with the Source Filmmaker again and learning it again. And although it's fallen out of, people still use it, there are many, many excellent tutorials, including the original Valve tutorials on it. And it's much less intimidating now than it was when it first came out. When it first came out, people, if you didn't know what a 3D program was, it looked like, I always like to use this analogy, sitting in front of a control panel for a jumbo jet. You know, there are so many dials and switches and knobs and readouts that you have no idea where to begin. But that first factor that turns people away, if you're diligent, it becomes much clearer because it's built on the same structure that most 3D programs are. And that structure has a logical and intuitive progression. So I started working with it, and it gave me an appreciation for this film pick because very few of those tutorials were available when Paul Marino made this film. But he was well aware of how to create using 3D because he had worked with Unreal and several other programs. I'm sure he knew 3D Studio Max and others. So it gave me an appreciation for his technical achievements on making this film. So those are my comments. If you want the 20th anniversary edition, it was free for about a week, but now it's not. It's $9.99 and well worth it. Because you get the Source Filmmaker with it. You get the SDK, which allows you to create levels. It's just a wonderful package, and the visuals have improved, and I highly recommend it. We'll be sure to include a link to it. So, Tracy, can you take over and give us a little of the background on this film and Paul Marino?
I absolutely can, yes. I'm Still Seeing Breen actually was released originally on the 5th of March 2005 by Paul. Under his moniker, Il Robinson. He was part of the Il Clan, of course, if you remember the Il Clan. And then during the lockdown, he actually found the 480p version, which is also released on his channel. And that was the broadcast version that went out on MTV2 sometime after it had been released. But yeah, let me give you a little bit of the backstory, if you like. So, I'm going to start a little bit before this film was released. It's basically as the machinima movement began to evolve in the very early 2000s, Paul, who, as you said, Ricky, was heading up the Academy of Machinima Arts and Science, which for those of you that don't know, was basically a community-formed body created to support the developing world of machinima as it was at the time, and also to recognise the great many number of people that were finding machinima and wanting to use. And so AMAS, as it was shortened to, was basically a sort of a community body that was there to support people and celebrate the medium as it was growing. So in June 2002, with that sort of with AMAS sort of in train and what have you, Paul announced the first annual Machinima Awards to be held Con. And this was organised with Hugh Hancock, who was one of the two guys with Anthony Bailey that came up with the term machinima, and also Catherine Anna Kang. I don't know if you remember Catherine. She is still the wife, I think, of John Carmack, who was one of the co-creators of Doom. Anyway, the success of that festival was such that it is basically what really drove public interest in machinima, resulting in many, many appearances at film festivals and events and lots of media coverage. And by April 2004, Paul announced he was writing a new book about machinima, which would basically intended to serve as an industry Bible for emerging filmmakers, and was intended to cover the latest technologies that were coming out for filmmaking using 3D engines, as well as sort of celebrate its history and who the major players were and where he thought the machinima movement was going at the time. So there was a huge amount of excitement about that in the community. And then later in the year, by September 2004, the Ottawa Film Festival had agreed to create a machinima award. And this was considered to be a massive endeavor. It was the first sort of formal recognition by a major international film festival to give formal recognition to machinima. However, the festival itself, it basically ditched its celebration of machinima and snubbed the community in the award ceremony by actually not presenting the dedicated machinima award. And the jurors cited the reason for not making the award as being the standards of excellence were not fulfilled. But what really burned people at the time was that the community was, largely ignored. The medium was very poorly explained, as was its potential for filmmaking to that festival's audience. So it pissed off everybody at the time. During that festival, Paul and a load of other machinimators that were, I don't know, Ricky, if you were in the audience at the time, but a whole load of folks got up and left during the award ceremony. And then there was this kind of massive backlash from the community in protest of the jurors' decision. The following day, Paul wrote on the community website, machinima.com, that at the very moment where machinima was about to make a monumental step towards respectability, it was belittled by the people who are either ignorant of its importance or extremely threatened by its future. And when I talked to Ben about this, Ben described that as the beginning of an absolute firestorm of anger and disappointment, which ultimately led to the Ottawa Film Festival creative director trying to apologize for the handling of the Machinima Award. But I think ultimately it was seen as a bit of a watershed moment for Machinima. And fundamentally, it's what galvanized Paul into new action. And it's this new action that led to I'm Still Seeing Breen. On the 7th of December, that year, 2004, Paul wrote his very first web blog post about Machinima and Half-Life 2 demo recording. And then on the 26th of January, in 2005, he and some of the crew from Rooster Teeth, Matthew Ross being one, and Bernie and a few others, hosted a Machinima panel discussion at the Sundance Film Festival, which was basically some consolation for the disappointment they'd experienced at Ottawa. The forerunner for I'm Still Seeing Breen was the machinima made as a piece of material for the Sundance presentation. And it was primarily created to demonstrate it as a commercial medium. And it was a music video made in Half-Life 2, obviously, with Gman lip sync to the words of So Cold from the music group Breaking Benjamin. Now, the release of I'm Seeing Breen was made more widely a little bit later via Paul's own weblog, and that was on the 5th of March, 2005. But it was actually later updated on the 21st of March based on feedback and tooltips from the good folks at Valve. And as you said, Ricky, he used Poser and Vegas video and one or two other bits and pieces. And it was made to be played using Windows Media Player 9 Plus or the DivX player. And thereafter, Paul and others undertook a bunch of public engagement events, including at Harvard and at the Performing Arts Center in New York for the AGI movie convention. And it was by June that year that I'm Still Seeing Breen was shown as part of the season 2 premiere lineup on the MTV2's Video Mods television show. It's also worth commenting a little bit about on the MTV2 channel and how that came to be, actually, because it was initially, there was a channel called, I don't know if you remember this, 3D TV, which began to emerge with a focal interest on machinima, beginning with this group called, I think, 3DI TV in about February 2002. So there's a lot of interest in machinima way back then. And it was seeking to become a dedicated machinima TV station. And although it never really gained ground, what it did do was stimulate a lot of interest as well, this time, particularly in music videos. Well, by mid-September 2004, so this is around about the time that everything was gearing up for Ottawa, NTV's side channel, MTV2, aired this new series called Video Mods, which aimed to show the convergence that was really becoming evident at that time between film and music and comic books and games. And it was really encapsulated by everything that machinima was about. And Video Mods was described as being a dedicated show for machinima music videos, drawing on games such as Sims 2, Tribes Vengeance, Blood Rain, and various others. And its executive producer was a guy called Alex Coletti, who is, still these days a well-known music producer with various Emmy wins and nominations behind him as well. Now, that show aired for 2 years from the 18th of September 2004 and actually was produced by a guy called Tony Shiff, then of Big Bear Entertainment, with a pilot for the series having been underwritten, believe it or not, by Electronic Arts in December 2003. And it featured SSX3, its Sims, and Need for Speed games. So there was a bunch of games that they were particularly keen on showcasing there. But what they produced, I think, wasn't so much machinima. It wasn't so much music videos celebrating the music with game-based stories, but basically these were advertisements for games set to popular music, which some hadn't even been released to the market at the point that they were used in that show. I won't say a lot more about that, because if you want to read about that part of the story, I mean, we've written bits of it in the Pioneers book, and Tony actually did an interview with us about all of that and the MTV show. So I can point you in the direction of the relevant bit in the book if you wanted to read more about that. But I think it was super interesting when we did do that discussion with him, that, you know, he was very clear that at the time he struggled to actually get film producers and the CG industries to listen to him about the potential and impact of machinima, which is really, you know, that whole thing was a lot of kickback from the established industries at the time. And in some senses, I think why that's super interesting, just reflecting on it now, is because, you know, we're just seeing Sam Crane's recent successes with his machinima production called Grand Theft Hamlet, reaching all the same touch points that, you know, Paul and others reached back in those very early days with very similar kinds of content. It's interesting because it's almost 20 years to the day that those early successes by Paul were first celebrated by the machinima community. So that's all I wanted to say on the background. I think it's a super interesting pick. It's very timely, I think. And yeah, I'd be really interested to hear what everybody thinks of it.
Sure. Watching it several times made me reflect back on the time when it was first released. And I think this is a keystone moment in machinima, because, as you pointed out in your backgrounder, Paul's motive was to create something that would challenge the judgment of the sort of establishment from the Ottawa Film Festival. And I think he succeeded brilliantly, because in truth, he wasn't trying to answer them. He was trying to inspire the community. And at that time, the community, this was the first phase of machinima where it was just forming, and people were very interested in the medium because it was accessible to them. They could use their game to create stories that they thought were fun and interesting. And Paul showed them how. And one of the things he decided to do was create a music video. And I personally think that a music video is one of the most perfect forms for machinima, because it solves several problems that a beginning filmmaker has to address when they make a film, which is, where do they get the story material? What do they do about dialogue? How do they get the footage from the game? So you get two of those problems solved already, because you pick the song that you want to do, and you already have your script because the song does the script. So basically your work is to try to find the images within the game and to animate them. And Paul was very skilled at the time. So he used the animation program. He used the figure. You can choose, when you do Source Filmmaker, you have access to a whole range of characters. You can choose whatever character you want. And also you can choose your location. Now, he was smart because he didn't want to do full body animations. He just wanted to do facial animations and facial and head movement, because what that did was that lessened his job. He didn't have to do, he go in and do the whole body reacting to something. He could just do the face. So with the head animation, he used a technique called pose to pose, which means you go in and you set a key for the first position of where you want the head to be, and then you move forward in the timeline, in the actual time, and then you move the character to the second position you want its head to be. And the program interpolates from the first position to the second one, and it makes the move automatically. But it still requires, even though you're doing pose to pose, you have to make sure that those poses are smooth. So it's quite a job. the lip sync is taken care of automatically. And then within the Source Filmmaker is a program called Face Poser that allows you to adjust the facial expressions of the character. You can do general ones or you can do specific ones. And Paul didn't do a lot of changes of the face because I think he was trying to just get the job done. Because in addition to doing the head, he had to choose the sections of the actual game, Half-Life, that he wanted to edit into the story, which was basically the entire Half-Life 2 story. In fact, I think overall, the film that he created is something that I wish we'd see more often, but was particularly evident when the machinima first started out. And that's the film as a celebration of the game itself. And I think that the biggest impact on the film today, you can still be impressed by what the film does, how it looks, the fantastic music by Breaking Benjamin. But what it does, it celebrates the film because it follows the film story from the earliest parts to the very end. And it makes a kind of social comment, the same social comment. It reinforces the social comment that the game has, which is individual freedom over corporate alien invaders. You know what I mean? Which could transfer to the ideas which are still evident today. I mean, I've been watching the Foundation adaptation of Isaac Asimov, and it's the same thing. It's individual freedom, people struggling and working with each other to overcome this massive corporate organizational structure. So I loved watching that. I haven't listened to Breaking Benjamin in a while, so I was thrilled to listen to their music. Their music is just fantastic. And it provides a kind of emotional grounding of the film as well. The facial animation, he didn't do much for it because it's a bit hard to do that. But he did enough in order to satisfy what the film, the music lyrics required. But what most impressed me was the video editing of the various locations and the rhythm that he was able to take from the song, you know, because the song has a specific rhythm to it, and then reflect that in the video editing. So it just showed me how talented he was and why the film was had such a big impact on the community. I remember watching it, and it was like a thunderclap to me. I remember thinking, my God, if I could just make something like that. And the great thing about Paul, he says, well, you can do that. So I love this film, and I'm very interested to see what you guys think of it.
Yeah, this film, Damien, you're muted, so I'm going to take advantage of that and go ahead and go. This film was released right around a time when I was returning to the machinima community after having taken a break for a few years.
A sabbatical.
So I had been involved in the early days before the machinima term was around, and I don't remember if I had been introduced to Paul and Frank and the Ill Clan guys at that point or not, but we knew who we were. Communication was very different back then, right? There were no Zoom calls or things like this. So
right.
I'm trying to remember the degree of our interaction, but I know that I was very aware of and their work in the Quake engine, and I had attended the predecessor to what would later become those AMAS, the Machinima Awards. And they just called them the Quake Movie Awards. And Hugh would MC them, and it was all on MIRC chat. So there's no audio at all. It's just, and you got to understand, if you've never done okay, so picture, have you ever watched the comment thread on a really heavily populated live stream on YouTube where it's like scrolling by almost too fast to even read what was going on? So how they got anything done with that, I don't know. But you know, all the intros and speeches and whatnot that would normally happen at like the Oscars, were happening there, but all just in this chat thing. So yeah, then I took a break for several years and came back. And of course, during that time off, that's when the machinima term had gotten coined, and the whole movement had kind of solidified. And Hugh had already launched the machinima.com website, and this was one of the first machinima films that I saw having come back. And yeah, so talk about a leap forward, having not seen any of the gradual progression that no doubt went on between those, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. But to see this, it was stunning, and it was also encouraging and surprising to me. It's like, oh, I know him, Paul Marino, right? So, and it was a very different type of film than I'd seen, than ILClan had ever embarked upon. They were more of they were like the Monty Python of machinima. You know, they were a comedy troupe, and they did sketch comedy basically, and that played into a lot of the strengths that Paul and Frank and some of the others had as entertainers before coming to this medium. You know, they were already had already established their talents, and I know in Paul's case had won some tangible awards for that work before ever sitting down at the game of Quake, I think. So anyway, it was compelling and interesting. And here's Paul, and he's the president of you know, the Machinima Arts and Sciences, and there's festivals going on, and it was mind-blowing. And to me, this film sits right in the center of, I've come back to my hometown after being away for a few years, and whoa, look what's happened at this place. It was that kind of feeling.
Right.
So yeah, when I watch it, whenever I watch it, it kind of evokes that sense of awe of this thing that had sprouted up while I was away. So I'm trying to remember if there's any technical details that I remember about, because I had lots of questions about how'd you do this, which I'm sure he fielded plenty of those questions. I believe that one of the things that came up was, hey, why the Gman? Other than the fact that, okay, the Gman is probably the most interesting face in the Half-Life series, and one of the more interesting characters. You know, he's because he's so shrouded in mystery, and he was the video game equivalent of the cigarette smoking man from the X-Files, you know, almost deliberately so, I think. But one of the things that came up was, of all those characters that you have to choose from to pull from the stock of ones that are available in Half-Life 2, not all of them had the animation bones to do proper lip sync and to do facial expressions at all. So, you know, you have models in there for the different scientists and for Barney, the security guard, and all them, but they weren't as detailed, the bone structure there, to do even things as simple as eyebrow movements and eye squints and stuff like that. The G-Man was the one that Valve invested the most detail in. That practice is still true today, by the way. If you pull up certain characters from even GTA 5, if it's just some random pedestrian, they don't have the detail of bone structure. Same in Red Dead Redemption 2. They don't have the same detail as the lead characters do, you know, who are taking part in cutscenes and who are actually doing a lot of speaking and being seen up close. So that's a lot of what informed that decision. What I liked about the film the most, and still do, is the fact that of all the statements I feel like Paul was making with this, one of them was in response to the criticisms that Machinima had been given. What's the most vulnerable shot to take part in for a medium that's been criticized for its quality? And that's a close-up. And frankly, close-ups were not something Machinima was known for prior to this at all. No. Right? You didn't do that. You wide shots, please. We don't want to see him up close, or all these flaws and imperfections and just low resolution are made apparent. And the fact that he just boldly built this whole video around a close-up of a face, it's hard to convey how revolutionary that was at the time. Right. Because it's not terribly uncommon nowadays. But
it's ironic, Phil, you know, that first on the video that Ricky shared with us, there's a bit of speaking right at the beginning, but that's the bit that had to be cut when it went onto the MTV2 channel because they didn't want that bit of it because of the IP to do with it. So some of the impactfulness of that was immediately sort of halted from being shown on the biggest channel that it could have been at the time.
You're talking about the intro where Breen is speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably had to do with the IP on the
Yeah.
audio, I would imagine.
Yeah,
but
that's exactly it.
but for the course of the video, the singing all being done, being puppeted with that Gman face in extreme close up.
Yeah.
And I just loved the audacity of that at the time of just, wow, we can, I remember thinking at the time, I have no idea how, but it is encouraging to know that we can do that, And at the time, I'll admit, I probably attributed it to less. I failed to comprehend that this was, Paul's message, like you said, Ricky, was this: you can do this. The tools are there. This is achievable. And I looked at it as, man, that guy's got some skills that I don't even know how to touch, And I wish that I had been a little bit less low self-esteem in my evaluation of it and just seen the optimism that he was trying to portray about,
right in.
Hey, these tools are it. Because of that, I remained heavily intimidated by Source Filmmaker for those years. And
you weren't alone.
Some really interesting people didn't approach it that way and created some amazing stuff. Zachariah Scott's another one that I think of from that era.
That guy's
from
great.
Fuse, who also went to work in the games industry. And he just did some amazing things in that. He and there's several others, too many to name. But anyway, yeah, I love the film. And if there's any melancholy about it, it's that, man, I wish Paul was still making independent films like this. I'm sure his fingerprints are all over a lot of video games that we've all enjoyed, right? So he is still, he did still for quite a long time after that make stuff. But there's something really special about the handcrafted, I made this for the love of it kind of thing, or for whatever reason. But
when he and several other important people left the machinima community, and they did leave it, they went on to professional careers with major game companies and went on to do fantastic things. It was a problem because, one, it argued against what Paul had been saying for years, which is machinima is an art form. And the fact that he left it sort of countered his argument in a way, but completely understandable. You got a life, you got a family, you've got to make money, you got to move on to something that is not a bunch of amateur people gathered around a website with questions. You need to move on to something that is part of the commerce, part of what's going on. So I understand it. But his action had, just like Hugh selling machinima.com, it had an impact on the community that was far more than what they expected. Because when Paul left, the leadership, the drive for the community was lost. And although Hugh Hancock tried to take up that role, he was more interested in creating films on his own and his own film company, which is why he sold it to begin with. He needed money and he wanted to be able to make films. So he wasn't the person to take over that role because he had self-interest, his own personal motivations. So that's why it sort of faded out. But before I don't want to dominate this because you guys have got things to say, but I did want to point out that one thing that I very much enjoyed about this film is that Paul was very canny and a very smart person, and he had a message to say, because that first part was Breen talking about a suppression field that the aliens had created to stop people from procreating. And then the song comes, which argues against the notion of groupthink and the lack of individual power. And then at the very end of the video, you've got the Gman finishing the song, and then there's a very fast crossfade into Breen.
Yes.
and then it finishes. So in a way, Paul was trying to say Breen is the same as as a G-man. They're both trying to guide and control a person's fate and a person's freedom. And I thought that was very smart. And I only caught it through watching it again. Now I missed it entirely the first time. So I just wanted to share that with you guys.
So now I haven't got my stuff on mute. I can talk. I
saw your lips moving and I thought, oh no.
Well, I can never repeat what I just said because I was just so perfect. So I'll have to make do. When this was released, I was still very new to machinima. I released my Buffy inspired series about 3 months before, and I was trying to figure out what my next project was going to be doing. And obviously, it was a Star Wars project, and I moved on to some Star Wars games. But I remember I watched this, and I thought, I want to make something like this, not a music video, but just the way that the character looked and was animated, and the face moves, and the way his lips moved with the song. I was so impressed by that. I had obviously heard of and played the Half-Life games. I didn't know anything about making machinima with it. I didn't know anything about the Source Filmmaker or how complicated it was. I just watched this video. I was so impressed by it. So I thought, I want to do this. So I looked at Neverwinter Nights, which is what I used before. And of course, the character models of that, they're just polygons with textures on. There's no...
Yeah.
I don't think even their eyes don't even blink or anything like that. So that was not going to happen. Then I looked at the Star Wars game that I was tinkering around with, and the face is slightly animated, but nowhere near the level of this. So I thought, this is way beyond anything I could ever do. So now looking at it again, I've also got the understanding of the Source Filmmaker, which I still haven't actually used, but I know more about it from hearing from you guys, talking from other people in the community who've used it. I can appreciate how much work must have gone into this. And Ricky mentioned how the face movement is very subtle. That's perfect for this. Like, you don't want those exaggerated Sims face movements.
Especially it being in a close-up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Subtle is actually better. Yeah, it's not theatrical. So, yeah, I agree.
I'm sure that if Paul Marino had wanted exaggerated face movements, he could have done that.
Of
He
course.
knew exactly how to do that. He just knew that was not right for this video, which is good. Also, the machinima tools I'm able to use now, like iClone, they have the ability to make these face movements. So I can now make what I originally couldn't do when I first saw this, which is nice to think about when I was watching this again. It still holds up perfectly. I mean, obviously the video quality isn't as good as what we can do now because that's what the technology was at the time. But that doesn't matter. It still looks good, even if it's a little blurry and grainy. And the animation is still great. So it's one of those films that, yes, it's an old machinima film now, but it holds up really well.
It does.
Yeah. And Ricky, I'm really glad you chose it because I could appreciate it more. Obviously, I really admired it when it first came out, and it's like, I want to do this, but I don't know how to, and I never will be able to. Now I can, and I can appreciate the work that went into it, which I just said. But yeah, I decided to add anything else that you guys haven't already covered. And I wasn't really aware of the Ottawa. I'd heard bits and pieces about some kind of machinima snub, but I think it happened before I joined the community.
It's still smarts.
Yeah.
Still smarts.
So
it's like a kid coming in to show their project that they worked for years on, which is pretty good, to their mom and dad, and they're patronized.
Yeah.
And their mom and dad invited them to bring it and then treated them. Yeah, that I think is what made it doubly tough, you know.
I'm glad I missed it, but yeah. I can see.
Well, I want to when you're done, Damien. I want to close with one thing. I don't want to cut you off though.
Oh,
well, Tracy still has some comments to make.
I just have a couple more. I was just going to add. Have you got more to say?
No, I'm done. I think I don't know what else I can add because I just admire this film so much, but you guys have already kind of covered it. So
I also, I mean, watching this again after. I don't remember the last time I watched it, but it still stands out as one of the most beautifully edited pieces of machinima that I've seen, and as a music video, it's stunning. It definitely deserved to be a headline piece for sure. And the fact that he created it quite quickly after Ottawa, which it was created quite quickly after Ottawa, I think is even more testament to Paul's machinima chops, really. It was a kick in the arse for those guys at Ottawa. It really was. And the fact that he then got in front of the crowd at Sundance on the back of that was even more, more of an achievement, really, because the world of machinima absolutely was taking off. Ottawa made a big mistake in the way they dissed the community at that point. Big mistake. And it's unfortunate, really, because I think a lot of the community back for far too long. And I think, a lot of the current interest in machinima in a more professional capacity would have got there a lot sooner, I think, had they not have done that. And I think it was elements of petty jealousy, really, in many ways. I think it was
And
an industry.
institutionalism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They were just kicking back at what they saw because they didn't fundamentally understand the significance of what they were being
course.
shown. And
The
now
fact that they
everywhere.
chose the word excellence
Yes,
as a criticism is
Yes.
indicative of their mindset as well.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the thing is with the film these days, obviously it's not 4K, and the video quality isn't as great. It's quite interesting to watch the 480 version of it. It is a little better than the one that you shared, but not massively. And then to think that was actually the
broadcast standard.
that
That's
was
amazing.
the broadcast. Yeah, exactly. It was the broadcast standard video that Paul actually found when he was having a bit of a clear out in 2020, and that's when he uploaded that. And as you rightly said, Ricky, Phil, he's got incredible animation chops. He won an Emmy for animation, which was awarded in '92. But also, I don't know if you're aware of this, he was they used to do regular stand-up comedies. He was a proper comedian that would
Yes.
go into clubs and do all of that sort of stuff. So he was
Fiercely good writer too. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. The other thing that I recall about Paul, not having had a massive amount of contact with him, did a little bit, did some exchanges with him and talked to him when we were doing the book, during COVID, Ben and I. But I hadn't spoken to him for a number of years since that. But I remember when we did the 2007 Film Festival, he had been a technical advisor to that as we were putting it together, and we started putting that together probably during the period of time when the 2006 festival was being showcased in New York, because I think that's the first time I met you, Phil, was there. During the course of that year, that's when EA began to entertain him for becoming the creative director for Mass Effect. And by the time we did the festival in September 2000, or was it early October, I think it was 2007, he was just about closing his contract to go and work with the team at Mass Effect. And it was from that point, just after that point, I think, that's when he basically stepped away from his role with the machinima community, not because he wanted to, but because they asked him not to create any more content, which would conflict with the agreement that he'd got with EA Games at the time. So he was forced into that position, as were a lot of the other content creators. They were no longer able to create content that they could just put out there and showcase for the love of it, which I think was a real shame, because I think that's how these games companies robbed the community, by not allowing. They did a similar thing, if you remember, when we were talking about The Sims, the Fixer series in The Sims, with Todd Storkamp. They did the same sort of thing with Todd as well. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that little tidbit with you as well.
So my closing thing would be if we had Paul on the show today and there was one technical question that I could ask him.
Ooh.
And that would be, I'm curious how he pulled off. So I know FacePoser had like a phoneme detection engine where it could take audio and automate a lot of it, like Ricky pointed out. But in order for that detection to work. And this was true then, and it's just as true now with the there's a function in iClone called Aculips that is a more advanced version, a very, very good version of that same thing, where you can give it audio and it will do the phonemes. It's amazing. But if the audio is not clean, it really struggles. So like for a singing thing, you can't just put the song in there with all the instruments and everything and the vocal and get it to get it to come out right. It will barely be usable at all. So there's a couple ways around that, and I'm really curious which one that he used, and maybe somebody in the if any of the folks from the old days are listening and they know, let us know in the comments. But one way would be some kind of an isolation. You can run an isolation filter on a song and kind of extract out. It's not perfectly clean, but it can pull out the lead vocal, for example. The tech for that wasn't very good back then, though. I know for a fact it wasn't. Nowadays, there's some AI algorithms that are quite impressive with that. They can actually split out a song. They can split it out into stem tracks of all the instruments. It's not perfect, but it's certainly way better than what was available then. So that would be one way. And the other would be, and this is a technique that I have used, is you actually record yourself
saying
or singing the lead vocal, but you record it in multi-track so you can isolate it as just a separate thing. And that's what gets fed in to FacePoser to perform the lip sync. But then when you do the video edit, of course, you're using the real audio and muting that out. And so I'm very curious. It's a very nerdy thing to wonder about. But as an audio guy, I'm very curious.
No, I think that's a fascinating. It's a problem you have to face if you're going to create a music video in machinima. You're going to have to choose how to solve that. And I suspect it was the latter version that he sang along with the song. Yeah. And then incorporated it into...
Makes sense. And anyone who's looking to do that kind of thing, the good news is you don't have to be a good singer. You don't have to worry about if you're in tune or whatever. You've just got to be able to enunciate the words that the singer is saying and in the right timing. So yeah, it's an interesting little tidbit. Great pick. I'm glad you let us revisit this one with you.
And we'll provide a link to the Steam page on the 20th anniversary Half-Life 2 release, which I highly recommend you check out, because you do get a Source SDK, which allows you to create game levels, so you can create your own sets and props, and also Source Filmmaker, which is a dedicated application that has camera movement built in, facial animation, as we've been talking about, body animation, and the Steam Workshop. So if you want to bring in stuff from Gmod or stuff that people have created, maybe even in Blender, and bring that into Half-Life 2. Now, Phil's pick, which is going to be the next one next week, is shot in Half-Life 1. So it's going to be an interesting comparison from Half-Life 2 to Half-Life 1. So I'm looking forward to that next week, folks. Damien, you want to kick us out?
Yeah. Phil, when you mentioned that last thing, you got me wondering, exactly how did he do it? I was thinking probably he sang along as well. And you're right. If you're doing that, it doesn't matter how you sound, because the only person who's going to hear it is you. It's not going to go out publicly unless you release it that way yourself. But this is a great episode to start the year off. Excellent pick, Ricky. It's nice to revisit Still Seeing Breen. So that's it from me, from Phil, Ricky, and Tracy. And we'll be back next week with another film. Take care and see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.